The annual Tech Titans Summit at the Aspen Grand Hotel was the most exclusive gathering in Silicon Valley. Only billionaires, venture capitalists, and industry leaders received the coveted black invitation cards. The event was famous for deals worth billions made over whiskey and handshakes, away from the eyes of the public. Sundar Pichai arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple navy suit and white shirt. No tie, no flashy watch. The security guard at the entrance checked his ID twice, not believing that this ordinary-looking man was actually the CEO of Google. "You can go in, sir," the guard finally said, still looking doubtful. Sundar walked into the grand ballroom where about 50 of the world's wealthiest tech leaders were already mingling. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters carried trays of champagne. The room smelled of expensive cologne and power. Nobody noticed Sundar at first. He stood near the entrance, observing the room quietly. Unlike most people there, he hadn't founded a billion-dollar company. He hadn't invented revolutionary technology. He was just an engineer who had worked his way up to become CEO of one of the world's most powerful companies. "That's Pichai," someone whispered. "The Google guy. He's just a professional manager," another voice replied. "Not a real founder." Sundar pretended not to hear these comments. He was used to them. In a room full of people who had started with millions in family money or connections to venture capital, he was different. He was the son of an electrical engineer from Chennai, India, who had grown up in a two-room apartment where he slept on the living room floor. Mark Zeller, the famous founder of Nexus Tech, approached Sundar with a fake smile. Zeller was known for his arrogance and the belief that only founders could truly lead tech companies. "Sundar, good to see you. How's it going being the caretaker of someone else's creation?" Zeller asked loudly enough for others to hear. The room quieted a little. Several people turned to watch this interaction. They expected Sundar to laugh nervously or change the subject. Instead, Sundar smiled genuinely and looked Zeller directly in the eyes. "I think of myself more as a gardener than a caretaker, Mark. I didn't plant the initial seed, but my job is to help it grow in new directions while keeping the roots strong." Zeller blinked, not expecting such a thoughtful answer. "Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it," he said, sounding less confident. The event organizer tapped a microphone, calling everyone to be seated for dinner. The seating chart placed Sundar at a table with 5 billionaire founders, all known for their strong personalities and dismissive attitude toward professional managers. As Sundar took his seat, he noticed the others at his table exchange glances. They clearly wondered why he was seated with them. The first course arrived, an elaborate dish with truffle foam and gold flakes. As everyone began eating, the conversation turned to the topic of AI ethics. James Patton, a vocal billionaire known for his aggressive AI company, turned to Sundar. "So, Pichai, I hear Google is slowing down AI deployment because of so-called ethical concerns. Don't you think that's just holding back progress?" Patton asked, his tone challenging. The table went quiet. This was clearly a trap. Either Sundar would sound weak by defending ethical restrictions, or he would contradict Google's public position. Sundar put down his fork and looked around the table calmly. No one expected what he was about to say next, something that would change how everyone in that room saw him forever. Sundar took a sip of water and looked directly at Patton. "Actually, James, I think moving carefully with AI isn't about holding back progress. It's about making sure progress benefits everyone, not just a few of us in rooms like this." The table fell silent. No one expected such a straightforward answer. "Let me tell you a story," Sundar continued. "When I was 10 years old in Chennai, my father spent his entire savings on our first telephone. It took 2 years to get it installed. That phone changed my life because it connected us to the world." He paused as the second course arrived. The billionaires at the table were now giving him their full attention. "The point is, technology matters most when it reaches everyone. AI will change everything, but if we rush without thinking about consequences, we risk creating tools that help only the wealthy and powerful." Patton frowned. "That's a nice speech, but Google is a business, not a charity. Your job is to make money for shareholders." Sundar nodded. "Yes, and the best way to build lasting value is to create technology that works for everyone. Short-term profit at the expense of trust is bad business." Another billionaire at the table, Sarah Chen of Quantum Ventures, leaned forward. But you didn't found Google. You're just running someone else's company. How can you claim to understand the vision needed to lead in AI? The question was meant to put Sundar in his place. Everyone knew he hadn't started Google like Larry Page and Sergey Brin. He wasn't a founder with a dramatic origin story. You're right, I didn't found Google, Sundar replied calmly. But I led the team that created Chrome when everyone said Google shouldn't build a browser. I pushed Android when many inside Google thought it was a distraction. Neither of those were easy decisions. He continued eating as if the conversation wasn't tense at all. Sometimes the hardest innovation isn't having the first idea. It's seeing how to make that idea work in the real world, at scale, for billions of people. The table was quiet again. These founders were used to people trying to impress them, but Sundar spoke with a quiet confidence that came from somewhere deeper. Robert Jenkins, who had sold his software company for $8 billion the previous year, spoke next. I've heard you grew up poor in India. Is that true, or is it just a story Google PR tells? Several people looked uncomfortable at the direct question, but Sundar smiled. I wouldn't say poor. My father was an electrical engineer. We lived modestly. I slept on the living room floor until I was a teenager. We didn't have a refrigerator until I was 12. But we had enough for my education, which is more than many families had. He continued, when I first came to America for graduate school, I couldn't afford to call home regularly. A phone call to India cost $2 per minute, and my scholarship barely covered my living expenses. That experience shaped how I think about technology. Access matters. The waiters cleared the plates as Sundar spoke. The billionaires were now listening with genuine interest. They had expected a corporate robot repeating safe talking points. Instead, they were meeting a man with real experiences and thoughtful perspectives. Chen, who had challenged him earlier, now asked with genuine curiosity, how did you go from sleeping on a floor in Chennai to running one of the world's most powerful companies? Sundar was about to answer when the event organizer announced it was time for the keynote speech. Everyone had to move to the main stage. As they stood up, several billionaires who had ignored Sundar earlier now wanted to continue their conversation with him. The room was seeing him differently now. This wasn't just Google's CEO. This was someone with his own story, his own vision, and his own strength. And he was just getting started. After the keynote speech, everyone returned to the main hall for the evening's highlight, the Innovation Challenge. Each year, 5 selected CEOs presented their vision for the future of technology. The audience, made up entirely of billionaires and tech leaders, would vote on the most compelling vision. Sundar wasn't originally scheduled to speak. The organizer, Thomas Reed, approached him during the break. One of our speakers canceled at the last minute, Reed explained. Would you be willing to fill in? Just 15 minutes on Google's vision for the future. Sundar nodded. I'd be happy to help. James Patton overheard and smirked. This should be interesting. Let's see if the employee can inspire like a founder. Sundar chose to sit quietly in the back while the first 4 speakers presented. Each one showed impressive slides with beautiful graphics. They talked about space travel, brain implants, flying cars, and robot workers. The presentations were flashy and exciting, full of big promises about the future. When it was Sundar's turn, he walked to the stage carrying nothing. No slides, no notes, no props. I apologize for not having a fancy presentation, he began. But sometimes the most important ideas don't need special effects. The room was completely silent. Some people looked disappointed, expecting another polished Google production. Many of you know that I grew up in India before coming to America, Sundar continued. What you may not know is that my mother dropped out of school but taught herself to read. My father walked 4 miles each way to his school every day for years because education was that important to him. He paused, looking around the room. I'm standing here today because of people who believe that knowledge should be available to everyone, not just the wealthy or well-connected. And that's what drives my vision for technology's future. Sundar walked to the center of the stage. We talk a lot about AI, quantum computing, and augmented reality. These are exciting technologies. But I believe the most revolutionary technology is the one that helps a farmer in rural India get better crop prices, or helps a small business owner in Detroit compete with giant corporations, or helps a child in Brazil learn skills that will lift her whole family out of poverty. The billionaires shifted in their seats. This wasn't the usual tech talk about disruption and billion-dollar valuations. Many of you created amazing companies from nothing. You deserve your success, Sundar continued. But the next wave of innovation won't come from people like us in rooms like this. It will come from the billions of people who still don't have the tools and opportunities we take for granted. At this point, Sarah Chen, who had questioned Sundar earlier, was leaning forward, fully engaged. Even Patton was listening carefully. At Google, we're working on AI that can detect diseases earlier than human doctors. Not to replace doctors, but to help them reach patients who might never see a specialist. We're developing tools that can translate between 133 languages, so knowledge isn't limited by what language you speak. We're creating technology that works even on 10-year-old phones because that's what most people in the world actually use. Sundar's voice grew stronger. My challenge to everyone in this room isn't to build the next billion-dollar company. It's to build technology that improves life for the next billion people. Not just the wealthy few, but everyone. He paused, looking around the now silent room. The greatest innovations don't just make money. They make meaning. They solve real problems for real people. And they work for everyone, not just those who can afford the latest device. As Sundar finished speaking, the room remained silent for several seconds. Then, Robert Jenkins stood up and started clapping. Soon, the entire room joined in with loud applause. When the voting began, no one was surprised when Sundar's vision received the most votes, by far. What did surprise them was how he had done it. Not with fancy technology predictions or promises of enormous profits, but with a simple, powerful message about technology's true purpose. The billionaires had expected a corporate presentation. Instead, they had witnessed a vision that challenged their own. After Sundar's unexpected win in the Innovation Challenge, the evening moved to the networking session. Waiters carried drinks and small food plates around the luxurious hotel ballroom as people gathered in small groups. Sundar found himself surrounded by tech leaders who suddenly wanted to talk to him. Many congratulated him on his speech, but not everyone was impressed. Victor Ramos, founder of Ramos Technologies and known for his aggressive business tactics, approached Sundar with a drink in hand. Several other billionaires followed close behind, sensing drama. "Nice speech, Pichai," Victor said loudly, making sure others could hear. "Very inspiring, but talk is cheap." Sundar smiled politely. "Thank you for listening, Victor." "Let me ask you something directly," Victor continued, his voice getting louder. "You talk about helping poor farmers and children in developing countries. That sounds good on stage. But Google makes most of its money from advertising, tracking people's data, and selling their attention. Isn't all this talk about helping humanity just a cover for making more money?" People nearby stopped their conversations to listen. The room grew quieter. "That's a fair question," Sundar replied calmly. "Google does make money from advertising. We're a business, not a charity. But how we make money and what we do with that money matters." Victor wasn't satisfied. "But you're just a CEO, not a founder. You didn't start Google. You didn't take the risks that real founders take. You were hired to make money for shareholders. How can you possibly understand what it takes to truly innovate and change the world?" The challenge hung in the air. Everyone waited for Sundar's response. Would he get angry? Would he back down? Sundar took a small sip of water before answering. His face remained calm. "You're right that I didn't found Google. I joined as an engineer and worked my way up. But that doesn't mean I don't understand innovation or risk." He looked directly at Victor. "When I first proposed that Google should build Chrome, many people inside the company thought it was a terrible idea. Microsoft dominated browsers with Internet Explorer. The market seemed crowded with Firefox and others. People said we would fail and waste resources." Several people nodded, remembering those days. "I had to fight for that project. I believed that a better browser would help the whole Internet grow. Today, Chrome has over 60% market share. Was that as risky as founding a company? No, but it still required conviction and courage to push against doubters." Victor wasn't backing down. "One browser isn't the same as—" "Let me finish," Sundar interrupted, surprising everyone with his firmness. "When we were developing Android, we faced similar resistance. Many thought competing with Apple was impossible. Now Android runs on billions of devices worldwide, including many low-cost phones that bring internet access to people who could never afford an iPhone. The room was completely silent now. The hardest innovation often isn't having the initial idea. It's scaling that idea to reach billions of people while maintaining quality and purpose. Founders and CEOs both play important roles in that process. Victor started to speak, but Sundar continued. And about risk, my parents spent nearly their entire savings to send me to America for education. They bet everything on me. I understand what it means to risk everything. Something in Sundar's voice made Victor pause. There was a quiet strength there that commanded respect. As for making money for shareholders, Sundar added, the best way to create long-term value is to build products that truly help people. That's not just good ethics, it's good business. Sarah Chen, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. I think what Victor means is that it's different when it's your own company, your own vision. Sundar nodded. Of course it's different. But leadership isn't just about whose name is on the building. It's about making the right decisions even when they're difficult. It's about having a clear vision for the future and bringing people together to make it happen. He looked around at everyone listening, and sometimes the person who didn't start the journey can still help chart the best course forward. Victor opened his mouth to argue further, but then closed it. For once, he had nothing to say. The confrontation had revealed something unexpected about Sundar Pichai. Behind his quiet demeanor was a backbone of steel and a mind that was both strategic and deeply principled. The next morning, the Tech Titans Summit continued with a private breakfast for just 20 of the most influential attendees. Sundar found his name card at a table with several key figures, including Sarah Chen and, surprisingly, Victor Ramos. The breakfast room overlooked the mountains, with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Waiters served expensive coffee and gourmet food, but the real value was in the conversation happening around these tables. After last night's discussion, Sarah said carefully, I'm curious about something, Sundar. What was your biggest failure at Google? The table went quiet. In Silicon Valley, people often talked about failure as a badge of honor, but rarely did they discuss real, painful mistakes. Sundar put down his coffee cup. That's easy to answer. Google+. Several people at the table smiled knowingly. Google's failed attempt to compete with Facebook was well known in the industry. I was part of the leadership team when we pushed Google+ across all our products, Sundar continued. We were so worried about Facebook that we forced Google+ into everything. YouTube, mail, search. We required real names when many users valued privacy. We didn't listen to what users actually wanted. Victor leaned forward with interest. But that wasn't your project directly, was it? No, but I supported it, Sundar admitted. I didn't push back enough when I saw problems. That taught me something important. Even good teams with smart people can make big mistakes when they're driven by fear rather than user needs. Robert Jenkins, sitting across the table, nodded. Honesty about failure. Refreshing. What about personal failures? Asked Michael Torres, a younger billionaire who had built a successful fintech company. Any regrets outside of work? The question crossed an unwritten line. Business failures were acceptable topics, but personal ones were usually off limits in these circles. Sundar didn't hesitate. I regret not spending enough time with my children when they were younger. I was building my career, always working late, missing special moments. I can't get those years back. The table fell silent again. Many of the billionaires present had similar regrets but rarely discussed them openly. How do you handle the pressure? Sarah asked. Running Google means billions of people are affected by your decisions. How do you sleep at night? Sundar smiled slightly. Not always well, but I try to stay connected to real people using our products. I read user feedback directly. I use our newest products myself to experience them as a user would. And I remember where I came from. What do you mean? Robert asked. When I first came to America, I couldn't afford to call my girlfriend. Now my wife. Back in India, Sundar explained. International calls were too expensive. That experience shaped how I think about technology. It should connect people, not separate them by price or privilege. Victor, who had challenged Sundar the previous night, seemed genuinely interested now. You talk a lot about your background. Does it really influence your decisions at Google? Every day, Sundar replied. When we discuss pricing for new products, I always ask, would this have been accessible to me as a student? When we talk about design, I ask, would my parents be able to use this easily? These aren't just theoretical questions for me. As the conversation continued, the tone at the table changed. The initial skepticism was fading. These billionaires, who had built their own empires, were recognizing something valuable in Sundar's perspective. You know, Sarah said finally, I think many of us assume that professional CEOs are just caretakers who avoid risks and follow safe paths. But you're showing us something different. Sundar shook his head modestly. I'm just trying to build technology that works for everyone, not just people in rooms like this. By the end of breakfast, Sundar had shared more about his real thoughts, failures, and values than most had expected. His authenticity wasn't a performance. It was simply who he was, a leader whose strength came not from dominating others, but from staying true to his principles and experiences. The billionaires had entered the room seeing Sundar as just another corporate CEO. They were leaving with a very different impression. The afternoon session of the Tech Titans Summit was scheduled to be a closed-door discussion about upcoming regulations for AI technology. As the billionaires and tech leaders filed into the conference room, they were already forming alliances and planning strategies to protect their interests. Sundar took a seat near the middle of the large oval table. The mood was tense. Government regulations could cost these companies billions of dollars, and everyone knew it. Thomas Reed, the summit organizer, had just begun his introduction when his assistant rushed in and whispered urgently in his ear. Reed's face turned serious. I've just received some troubling news, Reed announced. A major security breach has been detected across multiple tech platforms. Early reports suggest user data from at least 4 major companies represented in this room may be compromised. The room erupted in concerned voices. Several CEOs immediately pulled out their phones, calling their security teams. We should end this meeting so everyone can deal with this crisis, suggested Victor Ramos, already standing to leave. Wait, Sundar said, his voice cutting through the noise. This is exactly why we're here. Instead of each company running off to handle this alone, what if we work together? Sarah Chen looked skeptical. Share our security information with competitors? That's not how this industry works. Maybe that's the problem, Sundar replied calmly. Hackers don't care about company boundaries. Why should our defense be divided? The room fell silent, considering his words. I propose we create an immediate joint task force, Sundar continued. Each company contributes their top security experts. We share what we know about the breach. We develop a unified response. And who would lead this task force? Victor asked, clearly expecting Sundar to volunteer Google. Not Google, Sundar said, surprising everyone. This should be led by whoever has the most expertise in this particular type of breach. Based on what Thomas described, I think that's probably quantum security. He nodded toward Robert Jenkins, whose company specialized in cybersecurity. Robert looked surprised. You have put my smaller company in charge instead of Google. This isn't about company size or market share, Sundar explained. It's about having the right expertise for the problem. Your team pioneered protection against exactly this kind of attack. The billionaires exchanged glances. This was not how technology leaders typically behaved. Usually, every crisis became a competition for control and credit. I'll offer Google's resources, Sundar continued. Our security team will share everything we know and follow Robert's lead. One by one, other CEOs began to agree. Within minutes, Robert was organizing teams, and engineers from competing companies were being connected on secure lines to share information. While the technical work began, Sundar suggested something else unexpected. We also need to think about how we communicate this to users. Not as individual companies, but with a unified, honest message. You mean admit there was a breach? Victor asked, looking uncomfortable. That could cause panic and hurt stock prices. Sundar shook his head. Hiding the truth will only make things worse when it eventually comes out. And it always comes out. Users deserve transparency. Sarah nodded slowly. He's right. Remember what happened to Branton Tech last year? They tried to cover up their breach and ended up losing millions of users when the truth came out. I propose we draft a joint statement, Sundar said. Clear about what happened, what we're doing to fix it, and how users can protect themselves. No finger-pointing between companies. We're all responsible for user safety. As the afternoon continued, something remarkable happened. These billionaires, usually fierce competitors, were working together. Engineers shared security patches. Legal teams collaborated on the public statement. Marketing experts designed a unified communication plan. By evening, the joint task force had identified the source of the breach, developed patches, and prepared clear communications for users. What might have been a disaster for the entire industry was being handled with unprecedented cooperation. As they wrapped up their emergency response, Robert Jenkins approached Sundar. "I've been in this industry for 25 years, Robert said quietly. "I've never seen leadership like that. You turned a crisis into an opportunity for real collaboration." Sundar smiled slightly. "Sometimes the best way to solve a problem isn't to prove who's smartest in the room. It's to bring all the smart people together." The crisis had revealed something powerful about Sundar's leadership style and changed how everyone in that room saw him. The final day of the Tech Titans Summit began with a different energy. The security crisis had been successfully managed, with minimal impact on users. News outlets were praising the unprecedented cooperation between competing tech companies. Sundar entered the main hall for the morning session and noticed something had changed. People who had barely acknowledged him on the first day now made efforts to greet him. Several billionaires who previously looked through him now made eye contact and nodded with respect. The morning's agenda included small group discussions on various industry challenges. Sundar was surprised to find his group table completely full. In fact, several people who weren't assigned to his group had moved their chairs to join. "Hope you don't mind the crowd," Sarah Chen said as Sundar sat down. "Apparently everyone wants to be in your group today." Victor Ramos, who had been Sundar's biggest critic, was also at the table. "After yesterday, I figured I might learn something," he admitted with surprising humility. The discussion topic was building technology for the next billion users. As Sundar listened to the initial comments, he noticed how the conversation had shifted from the first day. "My company has been focused on premium users who can pay top dollar," said Michael Torres, the young fintech billionaire. "But after hearing Sundar's perspective, I'm wondering if we're missing a much bigger opportunity by ignoring users with less money but greater needs." Robert Jenkins nodded. "I've been thinking about what Sundar said about his parents and his early days in America. My security products are probably too complex for many people who need protection the most." Sundar listened as these powerful tech leaders began seriously discussing how to make their products more accessible and useful to ordinary people around the world. Ideas flowed freely: simplified interfaces, lower-cost versions, partnerships with nonprofits, and education initiatives. During a coffee break, Thomas Reed approached Sundar privately. "I've been running this summit for 8 years," Reed said, looking somewhat amazed. "I've never seen anything like what's happening here. These people don't change their minds easily." Sundar smiled. "I think they're just seeing opportunities they hadn't considered before." "It's more than that," Reed insisted. "Victor Ramos just told me he's reconsidering his entire approach to foreign markets based on your ideas. Sarah Chen is talking about creating a division specifically focused on technologies for developing regions." As the day continued, Sundar found himself being consulted by billionaires who had dismissed him earlier. They asked questions about his perspectives on everything from product design to corporate culture. They wanted to know more about his journey from Chennai to Google. During lunch, Sundar sat with a different group that included James Patton, who had challenged him about AI ethics on the first night. "I've been thinking about what you said about AI development," Patton admitted. "My company has been racing to be first to market, but we haven't spent enough time thinking about unintended consequences." "Being first isn't always the same as being best," Sundar replied. "Sometimes the company that takes time to get things right ultimately creates more value." By the afternoon, several informal partnerships were forming between companies that have previously been fierce competitors. Ideas for joint educational initiatives, shared technical standards, and collaborative approaches to difficult problems were being discussed openly. As the summit's final session ended, Victor Ramos approached Sundar with an unexpected request. "I'm launching a new program to bring technology education to underserved communities," Victor explained. "Would you be willing to serve as an advisor? We could use your perspective." Sundar agreed without hesitation. "I'd be honored to help." Later, as people were saying their goodbyes, Sarah Chen pulled Sundar aside. You know what I realized this week, she said. We've been so focused on disruption and competition that we forgot technology is supposed to solve real problems for real people. You reminded us of that. Sundar shook his head modestly. I just shared my experiences. Well, those experiences changed how a lot of people in this room see the world, Sarah replied, including me. As the Tech Titans summit closed, the billionaires who had initially dismissed Sundar as just another corporate CEO were now seeing him and themselves in an entirely new light. The room of billionaires had been transformed not by flashy presentations or aggressive business tactics, but by authentic leadership and a genuine commitment to using technology to improve lives. 6 months after the Tech Titans summit, Sundar Pichai stood at the window of his simple office at Google headquarters. Unlike many CEO offices with expensive artwork and fancy furniture, Sundar's workspace was practical and modest, much like the man himself. On his desk sat a small wooden box. It had arrived that morning with a note from Thomas Reed, the organizer of the Tech Titans Summit. Sundar opened it and found a beautifully crafted compass with an inscription, "For showing us a new direction." The phone rang. It was Sarah Chen calling with exciting news. Sundar, our first technology center in rural India just opened, she said. Remember that idea you shared about bringing technology education to places without reliable internet? We've already enrolled 200 students. That's wonderful news, Sarah, Sundar replied. Please send me photos when you can. This wasn't the only project inspired by the summit. In the months following that weekend in Aspen, a remarkable shift had occurred in the tech industry. The billionaires who had once dismissed Sundar had returned to their companies with new perspectives and new priorities. Victor Ramos, once Sundar's harshest critic, had launched an initiative to make his expensive software available to schools in low-income areas. Robert Jenkins had created a simplified version of the security tools specifically designed for older users who struggled with technology. Michael Torres had opened his fintech platform to small businesses in developing countries. More significantly, 15 of the largest tech companies had formed the Inclusive Technology Alliance, committed to making their products accessible to users regardless of income, education, or location. The idea had started during that security crisis when competing companies worked together for the common good. A news alert popped up on Sundar's computer. An article from a major technology magazine featured the headline, "How Google's Pichai Quietly Changed Silicon Valley's Culture." Sundar closed the window without reading it. He had never been interested in personal recognition. His assistant knocked on the door. "Your car is ready for the school visit." Sundar nodded and gathered his things. Today, he was visiting a local high school where Google engineers were teaching coding classes to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. This was the kind of work that energized him, seeing technology create opportunities for people who needed them most. As he walked through Google's campus, Sundar's phone buzzed with a message from James Patton. "Our AI Ethics Council launched today. Thanks for pushing me to think differently about responsible innovation." In the car, Sundar reflected on how much had changed since that summit. He had walked into a room of billionaires who saw him as just a caretaker CEO, not a true innovator or visionary. They had expected little from the quiet engineer from India who hadn't founded his own company. But over those 3 days, he had shown them a different kind of leadership, not based on ego or dominance, but on authenticity, collaboration, and a genuine commitment to using technology to improve people's lives. Perhaps most importantly, he had reminded these powerful tech leaders why they had entered the field in the first place, not just to build wealth or dominate markets, but to solve real problems and create tools that made the world better. The car stopped at the high school. Through the window, Sundar could see students lining up excitedly at the entrance. These young people didn't care about billion-dollar valuations or market share battles. They cared about learning skills that could change their futures. As Sundar stepped out of the car, he thought about his own journey. From sleeping on a living room floor in Chennai to leading one of the world's most influential companies. That journey had given him a perspective that no amount of wealth could provide. An understanding that technology's greatest power wasn't in making a few people rich, but in giving many people opportunities. The school principal greeted him warmly. "The students are so excited to meet you, Mr. Pichai." Sundar smiled. "I'm even more excited to meet them." In a world obsessed with founders and disruptors, Sundar Pichai had demonstrated a different kind of innovation, one that measured success not by money raised or competitors defeated, but by lives improved and opportunities created. And in doing so, he had changed how an entire industry defined leadership.